the entire great community for inviting me to speak today. In particular, I want to thank Aaron Gardner, who's our great neighborhood organizer. Where's Aaron? There he is, right there. Thank you, Aaron. We've also got some Bulldogs for Barack, who are a very active organization on campus, and I'm grateful to all of them for the hard work that they're putting in. And finally, if there are those of you who are interested in getting involved in the campaign, obviously I want all of you to caucus for me. And one thing I know is when you come to Iowa, you've got to ask people to caucus for you. So we've got supporter cards here, and afterwards, if any of you are interested in getting involved, we would love to have you involved. Today's focus is going to be on foreign policy. So it will be a slightly narrower talk than I usually give in these kinds of settings, but we have so many important foreign policy issues that are coming up, and I think it's important for me just to focus on a few issues related to foreign policy today. I want to start, though. Yeah, we can talk about foreign policy. He's excited about it. Let me start by congratulating the great American, Al Gore, for being named this year's winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. I just had an opportunity to talk to Vice President Gore last week because the work that I was putting in on our energy proposal. He is an extraordinary leader for this country through his many years of public service, his early and vocal opposition to the war in Iraq, and above all, his singular leadership in drawing attention to the global climate crisis. Al Gore has advanced the cause of peace at home and around the world. For that, we owe him a great deal of gratitude, and the award that he received is richly deserved. It was 5 years ago today that the United States voted to give George Bush the authority to wage war in Iraq. 5 years ago this week. At the time, I was a candidate for the United States Senate, and I spoke out strongly in opposition to war. Nearly all of my opponents for the Democratic nomination for president made a different choice and voted to authorize war. Now, some have asked me, why are you reminding us of that opposition to the war? Isn't that yesterday's news? Is that experience really relevant? And what I always say is this: the question of the Iraq War and its authorization isn't just about the past, it's about the future. I don't talk about my opposition to the war to say I told you so. I wish the war had gone differently. But the reason I talk about it is because I truly believe that the judgment and the conviction and the accountability that each of us showed on the most important foreign policy issue of a generation is the best indicator you have about how each of us will make those decisions going forward. How we made that decision back in 2002 and how we talk about it today is critical to understanding what we would do as president. We will carefully evaluate, carefully evaluate the evidence and the consequences of action, or will we skip over the intelligence and scare people with the consequences of inaction? Will we make these decisions based on polls or based on principles? Will we have the courage to make the tough choice, or will we just choose the course that makes us look tough? These decisions aren't just Washington parlor games about who's up and who's down. These are life and death decisions. They impact our safety and our security. And above all, they impact the soldier from Iowa or the airman from Illinois and every single one of our brave young men and women who are in harm's way and all of their families and friends back home. Now, it's easy to oppose a war after it's gone wrong. It's easy to say years later that the war shouldn't have happened, given what we know now about how badly it's turned out. But every single one of us running for president only had one chance to make a judgment about whether or not to go to war. As I travel around the country, So many Americans ask me, how did we go so wrong in Iraq? And they're not just asking because they want to understand the past, they're asking because they don't want their leaders to make the same mistakes again in the future. They don't want leaders who bog us down in unnecessary wars. They don't want leaders who allow America to lose its moral standing. They don't want leaders who tell the American people anything less than the full truth about where they stand and what they'll do. That is the big part of what this campaign is about, because we need to learn the painful lessons of the Iraq War if we're going to secure our country and renew American leadership. The first thing we have to understand is what happened in Iraq, because there are two ways to look at this. The first way is to say that Iraq is a disaster because of George Bush's mismanagement, or because of the arrogance and incompetence of Dick Cheney, or Donald Rumsfeld in prosecuting the war, or because Iraq's prime minister hasn't been up to the job. But I take a different view. I think the problem isn't just how we fought the war, it's that we fought the war in the first place. This isn't just a problem of execution, it is a problem of conception. Because the truth is, the war in Iraq should have never been authorized, and it should have never been waged. The Iraq War had nothing to do with 9/11 or Al-Qaeda. It was based on exaggerated fears and unconvincing intelligence, and has left America less safe and less respected around the world. I came to this conclusion in 2002 when my friends warned me not to speak up against the war. Going to war was popular. So was President Bush. You'll be putting a U.S. Senate race on the line, they said. But I just didn't see how Saddam Hussein posed an imminent threat. I was convinced that a war would distract us from Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda and fan the flames of extremism and terrorism. And I didn't get into politics to stay silent on tough issues or to tailor my position to the polls. I didn't want to look back after an unnecessary war had been waged and regret that I didn't speak out against going to war just because going to war was popular. So I spoke out against what I call a rash war, a war based not on reason, but on politics. With conventional thinking in Washington lined up for war, the president and his advisors told us that the only way to stop Saddam Hussein from getting nuclear weapons was to go to war, and that we couldn't let the smoking gun be a mushroom cloud. Leading Democrats, including one of my opponents, Senator Clinton, echoed the erroneous line that there was a connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. We were counseled by some of the most experienced voices in Washington that the only way for Democrats to look tough was to talk and act and vote like Republicans. There's no doubt that President Bush failed us in the run-up to war. But the American people weren't just failed by the president, they were failed by the Congress. Too many members of Congress failed to ask hard questions. Too many members of Congress, including some of my opponents in this race, failed to read the national intelligence estimates for themselves, an intelligence report that was so unconvincing and so filled with qualifications that the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee decided to vote against the war when he read it for himself. Too many Democrats fell in line with George Bush and voted to give him the open-ended authority to wage war that he uses to this day. So let's be clear, without that vote, there would be no war. Now, Senator John Edwards voted for the war in 2002. He's renounced that vote, instead of pretending that the vote was for anything but war. Senator Clinton, on the other hand, has made a different argument. She says that she wasn't really voting for war back in 2002. She was voting for more inspections, or she was voting for more diplomacy. But all of us know what was being debated in Congress in 2002. We didn't need to authorize a war in order to have the United Nations weapons inspections. No one thought Congress was debating whether or not to conduct diplomacy. The headlines on October 12, 2002 did not read, "Congress authorizes diplomacy with Iraq." The headlines on October 12, 2002 read, "Congress backs war." Now, in the course of this campaign, we haven't just seen different candidates talk about their